My name is Darnell, and I am 30 years old. I met my fiancé when I was 25 in the kind of greasy spoon diner where the coffee tastes like regret, but the pancakes somehow fix your soul. I used to go there after work with my friend Ryan, half to complain about our jobs, and half because the food was cheap and reliable. The day I noticed him, Ryan's voice faded into background noise. He was behind the counter tying his apron, dark hair falling into his eyes, looking like someone who hadn't learned yet how much power quiet kindness can hold. When he asked what I wanted, my brain short-circuited. Ryan noticed immediately and laughed, telling me to stop being weird and just say something. I wasn't smooth back then. Instead of talking like a normal adult, I wrote my name and number on a napkin and slid it across the counter with shaky hands. He blushed, actually blushed, and Ryan said there was no way he'd call. He did. That same night, we talked for hours about nothing and everything. Favorite movies, dumb food opinions, how he hated pineapple on pizza with a passion that felt personal. By the time we hung up near dawn, I felt something settle into place. The next few months felt effortless. We walked through parks naming stray cats. We sat in booths guessing each other's orders. It wasn't flashy, but it was real, and after years of relationships that felt like work, this one felt like rest. He told me early on that he grew up in foster care, moving from home to home until he aged out. No parents, no stability. It explained the way he clung to safety, the way he seemed grateful for every small kindness. It made me want to protect him, to be the steady thing he'd never had. The only family he ever talked about was his sister, a woman he met in foster care. He said they weren't biologically related, but had grown up together and survived things most people couldn't imagine. She was his only family. I didn't question it. When someone tells you they came from nothing, you don't interrogate the one connection they kept. At first, I admired it. Loyalty born from survival feels sacred. But slowly, her presence started to feel heavy. He talked about her constantly. She called every night, and he always answered, no matter what we were doing. Dinners paused. Movies stopped. If she called, everything else waited. When I asked about it once, he looked at me like I was ridiculous and said she was his sister and I wouldn't understand. I let it go. Trust means choosing not to interrogate every discomfort. The first moment that truly unsettled me came late one night when I video called him. The camera panned, and there she was, shirtless, sprawled beside him in bed. My stomach dropped. He brushed it off instantly, saying she'd had a rough breakup and didn't want to sleep alone, and that his bed was bigger than the couch. When I questioned it, he accused me of jealousy, of not understanding what family means. I swallowed the feeling because I didn't want to be the person who doubts trauma. When his lease ended and he said he didn't know where to go, the answer felt obvious. He said he'd feel safer with me, that he didn't have anyone else. I covered everything when he moved in. Rent, utilities, groceries. I told myself love meant generosity. I didn't see how quickly generosity turned into expectation. Once he moved in, the house stopped feeling like mine. He redecorated without asking, threw out things that didn't match his vibe, invited his sister over constantly. When she first came, she didn't act like a guest. She acted like she belonged there more than I did. She dropped her bag in the living room, demanded drinks, and called him by a nickname that made my skin crawl. He laughed it off. I tried to be accommodating. That weekend, she followed him everywhere, sat too close, laughed too loud, stared at me like she was measuring something. When I finally said I wasn't comfortable with her staying over again, he exploded, accusing me of being heartless and ungrateful for everything she'd been through. Somehow, setting a boundary in my own home made me the villain. I told myself to trust him. I told myself I was overthinking. But deep down, something felt wrong, like I was being slowly pushed out of my own life, and I had no idea how much worse it was about to get. Once he moved in, the shift was so gradual I almost convinced myself it was normal. At first it felt sweet. There were 2 coffee mugs by the sink instead of 1. There was someone on the couch when I came home, someone who smiled like he'd been waiting for me. I told myself this was what commitment looked like, small domestic proof that I wasn't doing life alone anymore. Then I started noticing how quickly my place turned into our place, and how fast our place turned into his stage. He rearranged furniture without asking, saying it flowed better for energy. He threw out a few of my things because they didn't match his vibe, and he said it so casually I froze mid-step, unsure if I was supposed to argue or just swallow it. I swallowed it, because that's what I'd been doing since the diner days whenever something felt off. I was making enough money to cover everything, and he knew it. I told him not to worry about rent or bills while he figured things out, because I didn't want to be the person who nickel and dimed someone who'd grown up with nothing. That was the first time I mistook compassion for permission. Once he realized he didn't have to contribute, he settled into a quiet kind of entitlement, not loud at first, just assumed. And then his sister became a constant. Her name was Marla, and she didn't walk into my house like a guest. She walked in like she was checking on property she'd always had access to. The first weekend she came over after he moved in, I tried to make it normal. I ordered pizza, bought drinks, told myself I'd be friendly and treat her like family if that's what he needed. Marla dropped her duffel bag in the middle of my living room like a marker, took off her shoes, sprawled on the couch, and called out, "Hey babe, grab me a drink," like she was speaking to him from a throne. He laughed and actually moved, and the part that made my stomach flip wasn't that she said it. It was that he obeyed like it was natural. He didn't correct her. He didn't hesitate. He did it like he'd been trained. That weekend was a slow burn of discomfort. Marla followed him room to room, sitting too close, leaning into his space, laughing too loudly at everything he said, even when it wasn't remotely funny. I'd be right there on the couch and still somehow feel like the third wheel, like I was the visitor in my own home. At one point, she and I were alone for maybe 30 seconds while he went to the kitchen, and Marla looked me dead in the face with this smug calm that didn't match her sister label. "You're lucky," she muttered. I blinked. "Huh?" She leaned back and smiled like she'd said something generous. He's always had someone looking after him. First me, now you. The way she said it made my skin crawl, like she was passing custody. Before I could respond, he walked back in, and Marla's expression flipped instantly into sweetness, like she could switch masks on command. That night, I told him I wasn't comfortable with her staying over again. I tried to say it gently, like a partner bringing up a boundary, not a judge issuing a sentence. He reacted like I'd insulted his entire existence. He snapped that I didn't get it, that Marla had been through so much, that she didn't have anyone else, that she needed him. When I said she didn't need to be here every weekend, he accused me of making him choose, of being jealous, of being insecure. I kept my voice calm and told him I wasn't asking him to abandon anyone. I was asking him to respect that this was my home, too. He stared at me like that concept didn't compute, like my home was something I was lucky to share with him, not something I had built before he ever arrived. The next time Marla showed up, it wasn't even planned. She just appeared, claiming she was crashing for one night. I didn't have the energy for another fight. I let it slide. Around midnight, I walked into the living room ready for bed and found him curled up next to her on the couch. Not just sitting. Curled up, shoulder pressed to hers, his head tilted close like they were sharing warmth. I stopped in the doorway. "Why aren't you in bed?" He looked up at me like I was interrupting something important. "Marla's not feeling great," he said. "I'm keeping her company." "Keeping her company means sharing a couch?" I asked, trying not to let my voice shake. "She's a grown woman, not a kid afraid of the dark." He rolled his eyes. "You're making this into something it's not. Go to bed. I'll come up in a bit." He didn't. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of their voices downstairs. My stomach twisted with a jealousy I didn't want to own, and a dread I couldn't name. In the morning when I brought it up again, he used the same defense he always used. He called me insecure. He told me I was reading into things because I didn't understand their bond. He said the word sister like it was supposed to erase everything I was seeing with my own eyes. If Marla wasn't physically in the house, she was calling. We'd be watching a movie and his phone would ring. He'd glance down, say, "It's just Marla," and answer for 30 minutes. Cooking dinner, driving somewhere, lying in bed. If she called, everything stopped. One night I finally said it out loud. "Why does she call you so much? It's like she has VIP access to every part of your day." He sighed like I was exhausting him. "She's going through a rough time. I'm the only one she has." "And what am I?" I asked, and the question came out softer than I meant it to. "Because I feel like I'm always second." He stared at me, eyes narrowing, then hit me with the line that always made me feel like the problem. "I can't believe you're making me choose between you and my sister." I wasn't making him choose. I was trying to understand why the woman he called his sister was allowed to take up so much space in our relationship that I couldn't breathe. I started keeping a mental list of every moment that made me feel crazy, because every time I questioned it, he flipped it on me until I doubted myself. By the time I caught myself thinking, maybe a new place will fix this, I should have recognized how desperate that sounded. But I did think it. I had money saved. I had worked for it. I thought if I bought us a dream house, a fresh start, the walls would be bigger, the boundaries clearer, and Marla's constant presence would finally feel optional instead of inevitable. I didn't realize yet that the problem wasn't the house. It was the entitlement living inside it. The idea of a new house took hold in my mind like a promise. Not a flashy one, not something I bragged about, just a quiet hope that if we reset the environment, the tension would finally ease. I'd worked hard for years, long hours, skipped vacations, said no to things other people my age said yes to. My finances were solid. The current house was fully paid off. I had the means to buy something bigger, better, something that felt like a future instead of a battleground. So I reached out to a realtor. I didn't tell him right away. I wanted it to be a surprise, something good to cut through months of arguing about boundaries and respect. I found a place about an hour outside the city, a white fence, a big backyard, a kitchen that actually made me want to cook. There was even a spare room that could be an office for him, since he'd started working from home more. When I showed him the listing, he reacted exactly how I'd hoped. He wrapped his arms around me, told me I was amazing, said he couldn't wait to start the next chapter together. For the first time in months, I let myself relax. I thought maybe this was it, the thing that finally shifted us back onto the same page. We spent weeks touring houses, talking paint colors, joking about where we'd put furniture. Marla still called. Marla still showed up. But I told myself it would change once we moved. Once it was truly our home. I didn't realize how deeply wrong I was. We finally found the one. It felt right the second I stepped inside. Sunlight everywhere. A yard big enough for barbecues, dogs, kids someday. I was ready to sign the papers that week. We were sitting on the couch one night, the listing open on my laptop, when he leaned into me and spoke in that careful, sweet tone he used when he wanted something big. "Hey," he said, curling closer. "When you put the deed together, I was thinking, you should add Marla's name too." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because my brain refused to accept what my ears had just heard. "What?" He blinked at me like I was slow. "Marla's name. On the deed." I closed the laptop and turned to face him fully. "Are you serious right now?" He folded his arms. "It's our house." "It's my house," I corrected, my voice steady. "I'm paying for it." "And Marla's family," he shot back. "She's been there for me when no one else was. I want her included." I felt something hot rise in my chest. "You want me to buy a house with my money and put your sister's name on it?" "She's not just my sister," he said defensively. "She's my support system. Adding her makes me feel secure." I stared at him, stunned. "I'm marrying you, not Marla. I'm building a life with you, not her. She's not going anywhere near my house deed." That's when the tears came, right on cue. He cried about abandonment, about trauma, about how everyone leaves him except Marla. He accused me of not understanding because I'd grown up with stability. He said adding her name was about trust. "No," I said quietly. "This is about you trying to turn my investment into a family asset you control." The argument lasted hours. He cycled through every tactic I'd come to recognize. Guilt, anger, victimhood, sweetness. But for once, I didn't bend. I told him the answer was no, final. For days afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The demand wasn't just unreasonable, it was revealing. I didn't tell anyone because part of me was still protecting him, still hoping this was just a weird outburst. Then I ran into Katie. She was his best friend from college, the kind of person who overshared without realizing it. We ran into each other at a coffee shop near my office. After a few minutes of small talk, she asked how wedding planning was going. I hesitated, then mentioned the house issue. "What house issue?" she asked. I sighed and told her about the demand to put Marla's name on the deed. Katie froze mid-sip. "Wait, what?" "Marla," I repeated, his sister. Her face went pale. "You don't know?" My stomach dropped. "Know what?" Katie set her cup down slowly. "Marla isn't his sister. She's his ex-girlfriend. They dated for years in foster care. After they broke up, they started telling people they were siblings so it wouldn't look weird that they were still attached." The world tilted. "She's been his ex this whole time?" I asked, my voice barely working. Katie nodded. "I thought you knew. I'm so sorry." I walked out of that coffee shop in a haze. Every late-night call, every sleepover, Every time he told me I was jealous or insecure, every time he gaslit me into doubting what I saw, it all snapped into focus with brutal clarity. That night, I went home knowing I was done pretending. When I walked through the front door that night, the house felt different, like it already knew what I'd learned. He was on the couch scrolling through his phone, feet up, perfectly relaxed, like he hadn't spent years bending reality to suit himself. "Hey," he said, smiling without looking up. "Long day?" I didn't answer. I dropped my keys on the counter harder than necessary and said, "We need to talk." He glanced up, irritation flashing across his face for just a second before he smoothed it out. "About what?" I stood there, arms crossed, my heart pounding so loudly I could feel it in my ears. "About you and Marla." Something shifted. His shoulders stiffened. "What about her?" I didn't blink. "I ran into Katie today." The color drained from his face so fast it was almost impressive. "What did she say?" "She told me the truth," I said. "Marla isn't your sister. She's your ex-girlfriend." For a moment, he just stared at me, mouth slightly open, like his brain was scrambling for the right lie. Then he tried to recover. "It's not what you think." I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Oh, I think it's exactly what it looks like. You've been lying to me for years. You let me believe she was your sister while you brought her into my house, into my bed, into every corner of my life." He jumped up from the couch, panic replacing confidence. "We dated when we were kids. It was nothing. After that, we were family. That's it." "Family doesn't crawl into bed together," I snapped. "Family doesn't demand to be put on a house deed. Family doesn't interrupt every date, every night, every moment, and then call it loyalty." He tried to deflect, telling me I was twisting things, that I was blowing it out of proportion, that I'd never understand what they'd been through. I stepped closer and lowered my voice. "Look at me and tell me the truth. Have you slept with her since we've been together?" He looked away. That silence was louder than any confession. "Answer me," I said. His voice cracked. "Yes, a few times." The room went quiet in a way I'd never experienced before. Not tense, empty, like something vital had just shut off. I repeated the words slowly, needing to hear them again to believe them. "A few times." He started crying, rushing toward me, saying it didn't mean anything, that he was confused, that Marla had always been there for him, that it just happened. I shoved his hands away. "Don't touch me." "You let me feel crazy," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "You watched me doubt myself. You watched me apologize for being uncomfortable while you cheated on me with your ex and called her your sister." "I love you," he sobbed. "I swear I do." "If you loved me," I said, "you wouldn't have needed a backup." He collapsed onto the couch, head in his hands, repeating that he couldn't lose me, that he didn't have anyone else. That was when something inside me finally went cold. "That's not my responsibility," I said, "and it never should have been." I took a deep breath and said the words I'd been holding back. "Give me the ring." He looked up shocked. "What?" "That ring belonged to my grandmother," I said evenly. "You don't get to keep it after what you've done." He argued. He cried. He accused me of being cruel. I didn't move. I told him he wasn't leaving the house with it on his finger. When I mentioned calling the police if he refused, he finally pulled it off and threw it onto the table between us. "You're heartless," he screamed. I picked up the ring. "No," I said. I just finally grew one. I told him he had 1 hour to pack his things and leave. He tried every manipulation he had left. Promises, apologies, threats. Nothing worked. When his ride arrived, he called Marla first, begging her to come get him. She didn't answer. Apparently, loyalty only went one way. When he finally dragged his bags out the door, he turned back one last time. "I'll wait for you," he said. "You'll come back." I shut the door in his face, locked the deadbolt, and slid down against it, breathing hard. The house was silent. No lies, no triangulation, no competition for space or affection. I sat there for a long time, holding the ring in my hand, realizing I hadn't just dodged a bad marriage. I'd escaped a long con. And as devastating as the truth was, it was also the first honest thing I'd been given in years. I went no contact that night. I blocked his number, blocked him on every social platform, changed the locks, and let the quiet settle in like dust after a demolition. I figured he'd crawl back to Marla and they'd resume whatever twisted version of a relationship they'd been running behind my back. Not my problem anymore, not my circus, not my monkeys. But karma doesn't ask for permission, and it doesn't wait for applause. About a month later, I ran into Katie again at the same coffee shop where the truth had detonated my life. She didn't even sit down before she started talking. Apparently, everything had fallen apart faster than I expected. First, he tried to move in with Marla. After all, she'd been his family, his rock, the person he'd insisted needed access to everything I owned. Turns out Marla wasn't sticking around for love or loyalty. She'd been sticking around for money. While I was covering rent, utilities, groceries, and all the invisible costs of keeping a household running, he'd been funneling whatever cash he could spare to her. Groceries when she was short, rent when she forgot, a brand new phone after she dropped hers in a sink. He hadn't noticed because he'd never needed to. I handled everything else. The second I cut him off and the safety net vanished, his savings evaporated. He went to Marla expecting refuge. She ghosted him, blocked his number, disappeared. Loyalty, it turns out, has limits when the funding dries up. Katie said he bounced between couches after that, staying with coworkers, distant friends, anyone who'd tolerate him for a few nights. His charm wore thin quickly. People get tired of someone who arrives with nothing but excuses. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a flicker of satisfaction hearing it. Not joy, not revenge, just the quiet confirmation that I wasn't cruel for walking away. I was right. A week later, I got a text from an unknown number. Long paragraph. Apologies stacked on apologies. He said he missed me, that I was the best thing that ever happened to him, that he'd do anything to fix this. I didn't respond. I blocked the number. The next day, another number called, voicemail this time, crying, begging, the same line he used every time responsibility showed up. I don't have anyone else. I deleted it. Then came the moment I didn't expect. I was in the grocery store, minding my own business, comparing frozen vegetables, when I saw him at the end of the aisle. He looked smaller, hollow, hair unwashed, clothes wrinkled like he'd slept in them. He saw me and made a beeline. Hey, he said softly, like approaching a wounded animal. I nodded once. Hey. He asked how I'd been. I told him, honestly, fantastic. The word landed harder than any insult could have. He flinched. Said he missed me. Said he didn't realize what he had until he lost it. Said he wanted to fix things. I tilted my head like I was actually considering it. Then I said, I don't think so. His face crumpled. He said he didn't have anyone else. I told him that wasn't my responsibility anymore, that he made choices, that choices come with consequences. And then I walked away. No yelling, no scene, just distance. That was the last time I spoke to him. Life didn't explode into fireworks after that. It softened. It settled. It grew quiet in a way that felt earned instead of empty. I went back to the gym, reconnected with friends I'd neglected while trying to manage someone else's chaos. I slept better. I laughed without bracing for interruption. I remembered what it felt like to be alone without being lonely. The house felt like mine again. Not a stage, not a battleground, just a place where I could exist without defending myself. I redecorated slowly, intentionally, putting things back where I liked them, reclaiming space he'd overwritten. Every small choice felt like a declaration. I thought a lot about how easily I'd mistaken trauma for entitlement. How often women are taught that being understanding means being endlessly accommodating. How quickly empathy becomes a leash when someone learns how to pull it. I didn't blame myself for loving him. I blamed him for exploiting it. Months passed. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was still struggling, that Marla had moved on to someone else with more resources, that he was telling a revised version of the story where I was cold, ungrateful, heartless. I didn't correct it. People who need villains will always find them. One afternoon, I opened my jewelry box and took out my grandmother's ring. I hadn't worn it since the night I took it back. I slid it onto my finger and looked at it in the light. It felt different now, lighter, like it belonged to me again, not a promise to someone who never deserved it. I didn't dodge a bad relationship. I escaped a carefully constructed lie, and I didn't need revenge to prove that. The truth did all the work on its own. If there's a lesson here, it's not about catching cheaters or exposing secrets. It's about trusting the discomfort before it becomes damage. It's about understanding that love doesn't demand you erase yourself to make someone else feel secure. I'm peaceful now, stronger, wiser, and for the first time in a long time, I don't feel like I'm giving more than I'm getting. That's not bitterness, that's freedom.